Hello and welcome to this brand new series. It's the Epic India Research to Policy Talk series. Through this platform, we're bringing you face to face with experts. We're decoding their cutting edge research. We want to find out how this impacts India's energy and environmental policy. So, joining me on our very first episode, let me start by welcoming our guest today, Professor Sagnik Dey from IIT Delhi, Sherebanu Frosh. She's a member of the citizens group called Warrior Moms, and Dr. Ken Lee is the director of Air Quality Life Index. Our topic today is air pollution, but indoor air pollution. When we speak generally of air quality, we seem to be preoccupied with ambient air pollution. We look at the signboards, we look at whether the code is red, yellow, green before stepping out. But what about the quality of air in our homes or in our colleges or in our offices? So that's what we're going to be discussing today. So let me start by turning to Dr. Dey. He has just finished some research which shows that in 37 buildings across Delhi, the PM 2.5 and PM 10 levels were above acceptable levels. This was mostly in schools and colleges. So Dr. Dey, if you could take us through your research, what are the highlights, what did you find, and why these buildings in particular had high levels of particulate matter?
Yeah, thank you, Bahar, and thank you for having me in this important discussion. As you correctly pointed out, that most of the attention for air pollution related discussions is for outdoor air pollution. So, in this particular study, we wanted to first understand what is the level of indoor air pollution. Now, when it comes to indoor air pollution, I must say that there are two different stories for indoor air pollution. One is the type of indoor air pollution we experience in the urban regions. And then there is another type of indoor air pollution, which is mainly in the rural areas where people use solid fuel for cooking and other domestic purposes. Most of the studies in India so far focused on the rural areas when it comes to indoor air pollution. There are very few data sets for indoor air pollution in the urban areas. And that's the motivation of this particular study. And there is a general belief amongst the citizens that if you are in your home, then perhaps it is actually much better than outdoor conditions. So when we did our measurements, we did 2 rounds of measurements in the peak pollution period of October to January, so to say. And what we found is that, number one, that the pollution level in all the microenvironments where we measured, be it school, college, restaurant, malls, cinema halls, hospitals, everywhere the pollution level either is at par with the outdoor air pollution levels or even higher. Only in few places we find that the pollution level indoor is slightly lower than the outdoor, and even then also the levels are quite high. So that's one of the really startling revelations, that whatever people believe, that's not true, number one. If I take the data from the schools, what we found is that, and this was all done pre-COVID, so all the schools are full and all. So whenever children are present in the schools, the canteen is cooking, and there is a lot of dust raised by the use of chalk and boards. So those are the some of the reasons why the pollution level was so high, particularly in the educational environments, both school and colleges. Again, in hospitals and many other places, although these are really indoor, but what happens is that there is always a kind of ventilation. That means the outdoor air is infiltrating indoor, and that's what actually is driving the indoor air pollution, because most of these places, except the schools and some of the other microenvironments, there is no immediate sources. For example, when you talk about urban homes, there could be sources like if someone is burning incense, so that creates a lot of pollutions within the house. But none of these places those are happening. So one of the main reasons why the pollution was so high actually in the indoor environments is that the outdoor air was infiltrating. The other important point I want to raise here, that as far as when it comes for indoor air pollution, keep in mind that we do not have any standard. All our air quality standards are set for outdoor air pollution. And that's one of the, you can say, demand from scientific community, that the regulatory agencies or the ministries should set at least, some standard for the indoor environment, so that, people have some guidelines what to follow and what not to follow. So just to summarize, I think the indoor air pollution level is quite alarming. And in a nutshell, it means that there is a very large health burden, definitely, because ultimately we live 90% of our time indoors. So that's the main factor that indoor air quality should definitely be.
Now, Dr. Dey, some of the research that you've just taken us through, I mean, it's eye-opening, even for someone like me who deals with air pollution issues regularly, reports on them. Something like chalk dust, I can imagine, is inevitable in a classroom environment. But what about the other elements that you've spoken about? How can we improve the air quality in the buildings as far as the other elements are concerned?
I think,
Yes.
unfortunately, long-term solution definitely is to clean the environment, both basically reduce emission at the sources, so that outdoor air does not, even if it infiltrates, it's not really so much polluted.
Right.
What is happening today is that we are taking shortcut solutions of using air purifiers. Now not everyone can afford air purifier to keep indoor air clean.
Yes. Okay. So we will come to that because air purifiers really qualifies for a separate discussion altogether. But you are so right that I think with the pandemic, it's going to be a double-edged sword. What do we try to shut down? Here we are in terms of the pandemic. We are saying we need to have better ventilation. But when we talk about air pollution, so far what we've been saying is that we need to shut all our windows and doors down in order to improve air quality and just switch on our air purifiers. So what do we do? Open our classrooms? Do we keep them shut? For educational institutions, I'm sure this is all very confusing. Sherebanu, you've heard Dr. Dey. I really feel like I need to get a citizen's voice in. When you listen to this, you're listening to the research. Here you are sending your children to school and you think they're safe. But then here's all the data that you've just got. Is it frightening? And what is your reaction when you listen to this research?
If you have a classroom with 30 children, you have to ventilate it, right? You can't put an air purifier in. The only thing you can do is have an HVAC system that blows fresh air in, purified fresh air in. That's very expensive. Very few schools can do it. And I actually shifted my children to a school because I said if it's 500 AQI outside, they're breathing, that's in the classroom and trying to learn at the same time. But even with that, I mean, the doors are opening and shutting, people are going in and out. And the school was saying that this is the only place where a child is breathing fresh air. Because 90%, this is, rich kids, but still 90% of the kids don't have fresh air at home, right? So, it's such a hopeless situation. And in some ways, I feel like whenever we talk about air pollution in groups of mothers, it's always like, well, what should I do? Should I buy an air purifier? Is it worth, that's always the first question. In some ways, I think it's like a gateway drug, to understanding air pollution. If you really want to tap into the instincts, we all want to protect our children, right? Like we obsess about what they eat, so if we start kind of measuring, right, that's what I always tell people is that, start measuring. Just get some kind of a device where, low cost device where you see, and then it's really amazing what comes out,
So, Sherebanu, have you gone out and measured? Have you, as a warrior mom, I followed you on Twitter, so I know some of the issues that you fight. Do you know, for some of the people perhaps who may be tuning in and watching this show, take us through what you've done you've gone out there, you've measured the air quality. What did you find?
God, all the time. And that's why we become activists, right? Because we see the numbers. And I think that's why I think it's so important, because you say, okay, all right, first let me control my home environment. Then you realize how hopeless that is. Then you kind of say that, okay, let me see today what is the AQI in the playground where 40 children are playing. Oh my God, it's 400, What is the AQI in the squash court? What is the AQI here? So you start measuring things, and then you start kind of realizing how awful it is. And also, it really connects to people to understand numbers. I mean, you can tell them that your house has bad air, and they're like, no, but we have plants, or we have a tree outside our house, so we're okay. But then you say, please just measure, because I tell them a story. I had birthday party at home, and I had 20 kids, and we were frying puris. And I had the device on my table, and I saw that it went up to 2,000, and I panicked, and I said, oh gosh, get the kids out of here, evacuate. It's really high. To me, the takeaway that everybody kind of remembered I talk to them
Yes.
about Alzheimer's and diabetes and all these terrible things that happen with air pollution. And they're like, yeah, we've read about that in the newspaper, right? But, we fried something, and it goes up to 2000, and that's really
Right.
bad. That really kind of
Yeah.
connects to people.
So numbers work, numbers are important. Dr. Ken Lee, you've shown in your research in the past that life expectancy goes down. Health always touches people. It always has an impact. It rings a bell with them. You've also in your research shown that indoor air pollution impacts everybody across the board, whether they're rich, whether they're poor. So tell us, how does it impact everybody, irrespective of their age, sex, gender, or whatever it may be?
Delhi is the most polluted major megacity in the world. This is a city where in the wintertime, outdoor pollution levels are easily 20 to 30 times the WHO safe standard. Now, for many kinds of environmental problems, we often assume that it's the poor who will face the brunt of the burden. If you think about air pollution, richer people are probably living in cleaner colonies that are not as dusty. Maybe there's a lot of trees. They're also positioned to buy air purifiers if that's what they want to do. But for the poor, many of these kinds of options are unaffordable. But this assumption might not be true. In Delhi, there's only about 50 or so outdoor air quality monitors. And of course, there's very little that we know about the indoor air quality in the average Delhi household. And so a question that we often found ourselves contemplating was, who really gets to breathe clean air in Delhi? Does anyone get to do that? So a few years ago, a group of us at the University of Chicago, EPIC India, and the University of British Columbia began a series of studies to measure the demand for clean air in Delhi and the impacts of providing different kinds of information on air pollution and the health impacts of air pollution, on the various defensive behaviors and investments that people might take to reduce their personal exposure. So in other words, we wanted to know to what extent does the provision of information change citizen demand for clean air? So as part of this effort, we measured wintertime indoor PM 2.5 levels in thousands of Delhi households using a relatively popular consumer-grade indoor air quality sensor. So it's the one that many of us might actually have at home. Now we targeted both poor and rich households across Delhi. So one of the group of households which we refer to as low socioeconomic status households were from Delhi's poorest neighborhoods. So these were households located in areas that initially were informal squatter settlements. And another group of households came from some of the wealthier colonies. So when we looked at the PM 2.5 measurements, and we had nearly 100,000 data points, several patterns stood out. And a lot of it is actually very consistent with what Professor Dey just described. So first of all, in rich and poor households, indoor PM 2.5 levels were extraordinarily high, more than 20 times the WHO safe standard. Second, indoor air pollution in the richer households was only 10% cleaner than the air quality in poor households. So regardless of where you were living, it was pretty much the same.
That, I would say, is data which is very scary. Where do we go from here? When you come across it, do you feel that citizens are not demanding clean air? Why is there not enough of a political lobbying for clean air? Why are we not demanding this as our fundamental right? Does that puzzle you?
We've been interested in studying this question of demand for clean air in the average Delhi household, and how we can change this. And the reason why we're interested in this line of inquiry is because air pollution is a solvable problem. If you think back about the past 50 or 60 years or so, there are several examples of cities and countries across the world that had faced severe levels of air pollution, but were then able to reduce that pollution through strong clean air policies. And our view is that you cannot introduce and sustain a strong clean air policy, particularly those targeting fossil fuel emissions, without high citizen awareness and demand for clean air. And so this is, I think, a very important question to think about. How do we better communicate the risks of air pollution? Because PM 2.5 is a massive health threat. In India, and especially in northern India, it's shortening life expectancies by multiple years. Yet across India, this is a problem that has not been fully embraced and recognized by the public. And so I think that the question that we really need to ask ourselves is, how can we unlock this citizen demand for clean air? How can we take the data that we have, the research that we have at our fingertips, and turn it into something that will make people care about this problem, so that they will create this political pressure for change?
So how do we make this happen? As somebody who's researching this, you're looking at public policy, you're looking at data very closely. How do we create this vote bank, as we say, for right to clean air, given that really right now we're in the midst of a pandemic?
I think what our research shows is that the existing level of demand for clean air in Delhi is relatively low, and it's actually very hard to change people's minds by showing them data. And so we need to think about how to find more impactful ways to communicate this information. I think that personal stories of loss, I think personal stories of children with asthma or respiratory sort of conditions, those kinds of things really resonate with people because they can relate. They have children, they have elders in their households. And so I think there's a huge role for all of the groups that are doing these awareness efforts. I think that there's also a need for data so that we're aware of just how bad the air quality might be at different points in the year. But ultimately, this is I think an open question. I don't think I have the answer for it. I don't think but what I do think is that the COVID-19 pandemic has been such a tragedy, but I think we're at a point where there's really an attention that's being placed on public health. And so if we go out there now and we talk about air pollution as something that is more similar to a silent pandemic that is playing out over the course of years and over the course of lifetimes, then there might be an opportunity to kind of raise the urgency that people sense when they think of this problem.
Well, that's interesting. You're saying that the pandemic actually is an opportunity to talk about the silent pandemic that has engulfed all of us. And for communicators like me, that's very interesting because it gives us a hook to talk about some of these stories. Perhaps mobilizing people in waking them up to the silent pandemic that's engulfing all of us, that may be a way forward. All right. So I think we've covered a range of issues from the science aspects to the health aspects, but I cannot let my panelists go away till they give us the solutions. Imagine now, all of you, if you imagine that a policymaker has entered the room, what are the suggestions, the two dominant suggestions you would make to the policymakers? And I'll start with Dr. Dey.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the two things I want to mention here. One is that we must treat air pollution as a health crisis. For quite a long time, and what Dr. Lee also mentioned, that, air pollution has never seen as a, kind of from healthcare point of view, basically. People know that air pollution is there, it's affects health, but not really from that matter. And the second important point is that we must understand in India that air pollution is a year-round problem. And it's a regional or national scale problem, because that's where I think, so you asked this question that where there is a demand. Yes, in Delhi, perhaps there is a demand for clean air, but Delhi is not isolated. It's just sitting in this polluted Indo-Gangetic plain. So this entire corridor from, Amritsar to Bengal has so much pollution. So Delhi cannot clean itself just by doing something within the city perimeter. It has to be a regional integrated plan. Good news is that the government now realizes it, and that's why we have a national program, Clean Air Program, and now the 15th Finance Commission has also stepped in and basically they linked the performance of clean air actions. So all these things are moving in the...
So, Dr. Dey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're saying that institutions have been created. What are the suggestions that you would make, for instance, for the National Clean Air Program to be implemented better? What's the one thing that you would suggest?
For a better implementation, definitely we need actually a proper stakeholder engagement. Unfortunately, for the last few years, the way things are there that we have policies and all. But the ground reality is very different. For example, if you take the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, it's a fantastic policy, and we all know that at regional scale, solid fuel burning is one of the major factors.
Yes.
So now we have reached, I think, 90% or 92%, LPG penetration in the country. But if you see what is the actual usage, that's around somewhere 60%. So again, similarly for Clean Air Action Plan, I think implementation is the key. And for that, we need proper stakeholder engagement, where we need sociologists and all, different things. Because when we talk about stakeholder engagement, but frankly saying, it's not real stakeholder engagement. I have mostly seen the discussion is limited to the academicians and the policymakers, where the common citizens are never really part of any discussion.
So better dialogue with stakeholders. One of the stakeholders which I think play a key role are parents. Sherebanu, what would you say? Imagine you've got a politician sitting across this table. He or she is listening to you. What would you say to them?
And I think this, like you said, this Ujjwala Yojana is the most immediate. It's coming up. The 2.0 is coming up, and when we sit and talk in slum areas and in urban villages with people, and we say, we can get you a tank because this Ujjwala Yojana is there, but let's also sit and talk about the health effects. And people are really listening, because they know that there's something inherently wrong with the smoke, that the house is full of smoke. Yes. So that's a huge opportunity. If we can just pair it with health effects, we've got this huge team on the ground distributing these things, right? All you have to do is distribute pamphlets. I mean, if nothing else. So on health effects. So that would really kind of take it from being a one-time, giving of a cylinder to a lifelong kind of health. I mean, because you're talking about Ujjwala, that's a no-brainer. That's immediate. That's coming up. And the second thing is, I feel like a lot of the public, the dialogue that is happening. It's people kind of standing in a circle shooting each other, saying that you're the polluter, no, you're the polluter. But if we change that from being children are the victims, all our children, and polluters are not paying their fair share to fix the problem, we kind of change the whole dialogue. And I think that's what's important, because otherwise you just have lobbies. You say you're driving a car, but you're using a chula, and you can go back and forth forever.
So Dr. Lee, what are your suggestions to a policymaker?
I would say do not hesitate to lead with the health impacts here to the population. And the reason why is this. It might seem like doing that is a bad move because it's going to make your government look bad. But the thing is, in order to fix air pollution, there's going to be a need for all kinds of expensive policies and behavioral changes. So whether it's trying to invest in cleaner vehicles or reducing industrial emissions or changing agricultural practices, cracking down on waste burning, there's a lot of stuff that's going to cost money and that might be uncomfortable for many people, in terms of changing their behavior. If you communicate that the benefits of these changes, right, are potentially massive in terms of longer lives. So according to the AQI data, if NCAP achieves its target of 20 to 30% reduction in pollution, that translates into about 1.7 year average life expectancy gain. So that's an enormous public benefit.
Yes.
If people understand that there's a huge benefit that really outweighs the cost to them or the cost to their government of tackling this problem, they're going to be more willing to go along with some of the necessary changes.
All right. I like the fact that you've turned it around. You've given it a positive spin. You're saying here's an opportunity to add actually to the number of years to our life. And I think that would bode well with the politicians who's listening, because they're always looking for how do we get vote banks. And if you keep telling people air pollution, it's a doomsday scenario, your lungs are getting impacted, politicians are not likely to listen. But if you actually say that you can go out there and if you improve air quality, you're actually improving people's lives and their health issues, I think then people are more likely to listen to us. All right, you've been a wonderful panel. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. So far, I feel we've always been talking about ambient air pollution. How do we tackle indoor air pollution? Number of suggestions have been made. We need to look at the data. We need to give a positive spin to it. We need to get politicians to sit across the table and focus not just on outdoor air, but also the air that we breathe in our homes. I've learned a lot from this conversation. I hope you have as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.